Thank you very much for taking the time to join us once again on the August Housing Hive this time. So we're going to be focusing, obviously today you will have seen the information and signed up. That's why we're talking about the another sort of element of digital self-service essentially, but specifically the early stage of the customer journey around applications, customer onboardings. It's something we've helped numerous housing associations with over the years. Seems to be one of those parts of the organization, or at least process flow, which carries significant manual effort at times, and often still plenty of paper being passed around and sort of manual data entry and things. So it's sort of the reason why we're talking about it today, essentially. So we'll look to cover why it's quite important for us to focus on this particular area, some benefits into making it more efficient generally, and also some examples of it being done as well, some real world case studies to talk through. So yeah, I think we've got a fair few people in now, so we'll get cracking. So yeah, today's session, we'll do brief introductions into Liv and myself shortly, and a little bit of an intro into Prodo as an expert partner agency of the housing space for those of you who are new to us. Yeah, Zoom chat will be your best bet in terms of questions throughout. We do record and publish these sessions, which some of you may have seen, so it'd be ideal if you wouldn't mind remaining on mute just for the time being. That'd be much appreciated. And then, but yeah, feel free to use the chat to ask any questions. And also Liv will be popping a few links in there to certain bits and bobs as well. So look out for those. We'll move through the main part of today, which is obviously the topic we've just talked about. And then, yeah, we should have some time towards the end for a little bit of a Q&A. If anyone's got any specific questions, we'll do our best to answer those, or at least if we can't, we'll find someone who can and follow up with you soon after. But yeah, we'll get started. So quick intros to us. My name's Jacob. I'm head up the new business function at Prodo. So my team's role essentially is to consult with housing associations looking to identify and solve challenges using digital solutions, essentially, ultimately looking to align some of our products and services at Prodo to sort of help alleviate some of those. Our goal as a partner is quite simple. We look to use digital as a force for good, to streamline internal processes, improve customer engagement with digital for those people who are suited to it. Yeah, with the overarching goal really of freeing up your internal teams to spend that expertise and empathy with those tenants, those customers who need your support most, essentially with more complex inquiries or whatever that might look like. We've been around for a long time, so working in the housing space specifically for 20 years, and that's where we specialize in now. Over 100 associations across that time have worked with us, and currently around 50. And that's a range of different projects from consultancy services for digital strategy and sort of road mapping, digital solutions around portals and websites, apps and these sorts of things, and everything that sort of surrounds those platforms really. Joined by Liv today, one of our account directors. I'll let you introduce yourself, Liv.
Hi, I'm Liv. Yeah, as Jake said, I'm an account director here at Prodo. I've been here about 2.5 years. My key role is to kind of work with our clients to ensure that we're optimizing digital service offerings and strategically planning their roadmaps from both an internal process point of view, but also an optimization for their customers. So I'm really excited for today's session. Thanks, Jake.
Great. Thanks for that, Liv. One quick note just before we get into the detail. We do, as I say, record and publish all of these webinars. So if you are looking to maybe loop back on today's content, if you need to jump off or you want to share it internally, or even have a look at some of the other previous videos we've done, we'll pop a link over to that in the follow-up email. I think Liv's got a link to pop into the chat as well. If you did want to follow up on any of these, feel free to do so. This one will be edited and published tomorrow. And yeah, we'll link you to that one as well. So yeah, I suppose onto today's session then. So we talk lots about different elements of self-service generally, don't we? And this one today is specifically digital applications and onboarding. So that initial phase of the customer journey of looking to become a customer, essentially, I suppose. So we tend to just sort of quickly cover the purpose, or at least a particular topic that we're about to cover in these sessions. So we'll cover generally sort of the digital self-service purpose, because I think it does help frame today's topic specifically quite well, and also why we should focus on it. So self-service, obviously, from a high level, is ultimately, it's kind of twofold really, but the two halves are quite heavily intertwined as well. So for those segments of customers that have the means, the ability, and also crucially the confidence as well to use digital platforms, let's sort of provide them with the means to do so. So for the most part, their inquiries are almost taken care of to some extent. And in turn, what that does is it leaves those more traditional channels more open to those people who maybe don't have the skills or access or ability to use those digital channels, which ultimately hopefully results in less time spent by your teams on those repeatable and avoidable inquiries and tasks, and more time spent with the people who need that expert support most. So that's the overarching sort of aim and sort of purpose behind lots of digital transformation in the space, but also outside of the sector, obviously, as well, and putting forward digital self-service solutions, essentially. But when we think about where to focus from a digital transformation point of view, the first thing we tend to think of right away in the housing space is rent and repairs, isn't it? We know they're both highly important. Rent, obviously, the income generator, repairs usually being the one which carries lots of effort, lots of touch points, potential room for error, and potentially some frustration on both sides of the fence as well. But on the whole, generally, what we're looking to do is identify what processes have the following, essentially. So those sort of numerous manual touch points, aspects of manual data keying, because there's certain things being filled in offline and therefore need to be put in manually. The things that have significant room for human error as well, time consuming for colleagues, but also customers and prospective customers we'll talk about today as well. Paper-based processes still, which obviously can lead to, at times, inappropriate data storage if things are just being stored in a filing cabinet under a desk somewhere for a few years. And those things which look to sort of cause, well, don't look to, but I suppose essentially cause customer frustrations generally, and therefore lead to other sort of complaints and things down the road. It's that sort of typical matrix of effort versus value. So quick wins being the low effort, high value pieces. Low value as a whole, generally things that we can probably leave for now and consider maybe later on. And the high effort, high value pieces where maybe we should implement or put those into an ongoing sort of digital roadmap of improvements to work towards a little bit later on, but still very, very sort of crucial to address at some stage. And I suppose using that as identification, this is why we're talking about this particular topic today. So digitising that initial phase of customer applications, that first step of the journey. And what we mean by that is giving applicants or prospective customers the opportunity to essentially progress through the process of applying for a home online without the need for filling in paper forms at every step, posting information through telephone calls and face-to-face meetings where maybe they're not necessarily needed. And thinking about that criteria, which obviously needs to be assessed when considering an application, considering if a particular person is suitable to become a resident, giving the teams the information they need to be able to do that without needing to have to manually intervene at every stage and every single application as sort of time moves forward as well. As I say, we've been through this process a few times before, and I think this is fairly typical in terms of the process that we tend to hear about. So particularly from that initial stage. So the source of applicants coming from either direct choice-based lettings or even local authorities. So I suppose a few different routes in at the top of the, not funnel, but the top of the journey, if you like. Specific individual forms to populate in person via email, over the phone, and then just sort of the effort which goes into a manual assessment of that documentation as well. The prospective customer to provide and deliver the relevant evidence which needs to be checked, and also off the back of that, again, manual assessment of those pieces of evidence, things like ID, right to rent, and those sorts of things. Storing all of that information somewhere. As I say, some cases it's paper forms held somewhere in an office somewhere, which leads to, I suppose, one-to-one communications over the phone or email to arrange property viewings or ask queries on applications as well. The discussion and agreement of tenant responsibilities, and also the tenancy agreement itself signed physically, and the first payment, maybe deposit or setting up direct debits over the phone or even at that sort of meeting in person. Obviously, there's aspects of this process generally which do need to be manual and do need to be in person or have that sort of level of interaction. Doesn't mean that all of it has to be. The process will be followed. And of course, at times the application won't actually progress to a tenancy. So there's huge effort going in for potentially little return if we're going through all of these manual processes, keying all of this data in, passing paper forms around desks and between people, and then ultimately no new customer at the back end feels like a lot of a wasted effort. Certainly if it's the default process and the only process to follow that is anyway. But the process we've just run through there is quite fairly typical in terms of what we've carried out in terms of consultancy and investigation into this area. It obviously carries very high manual effort. There's many touch points and which lead to potential room for error. It's quite long-winded as well for the applicant. So the first step of the journey being having to fill in forms, having to come and visit the office and those sorts of things is a long-winded way to go about becoming a customer. Potentially inappropriate data storage, which we've kind of touched upon already. And it's, like I say, that sort of default process, if that's the only route to follow for everybody, there will be some people in there who are relevant and who are up for digital engagement or moving through these things using a digital sort of format. And obviously the data capture, the assessment of this information is all manual, and the appointment setting is only possible with a person and during those sort of working office hours as well, which again can certainly delay things somewhat. But there's loads of examples out there, isn't there, where specific data capture needs to happen. Supplying of information for an application is supported by technology to either make that data capture point more efficient or to help interpret it, to score applicants potentially in some way before somebody actually intervenes and gets involved, helping that assessment become easier. And of course, that data capture can happen at any point, at any time, and maybe any sort of location as well. Think of car insurance, a good example, job applications, applying for a passport, for instance. The Indeed, or generally sort of applying for jobs, is quite a good example of, you know, part of that these days is digital in terms of the initial application, initial potentially assessment, but there'll always still need to be that manual physical element of a remote or even that in-person interview or task to happen for that sort of further level of assessment, and therefore a decision to be made off the back of, you know, a job offer or not, I suppose. So it's a good example of what we're talking about today, in that lots of the initial phases of data capture and potentially interpreting some of it or scoring some of it, banding certain people some ways, can certainly be done with the support of technology, certainly for those people who are willing and able to do so, which leaves the latter phase maybe more accurate, less effort, and therefore quicker and more efficient to get people into those empty homes, which kind of takes us on to the next part, really, which is some stats around this. Now, obviously, empty homes, voids, reletting processes is only partially impacted by improving the application onboarding process. We all know there's many other factors and sort of facets involved there. But some data from Housemark and Property Reporter as well found that the average sort of days to turn around a void in housing associations is 20 days. For local authorities is a little bit longer at 23 days. And the average sort of loss of income, if you like, for that home being empty for a period of sort of reletting, specifically that loss of income is around £518 average per year per property. When you consider the sort of the ongoing, or consider the attached costs to that, things like repairs or everything that sort of surrounds getting a property ready for relet, as well as the fact that it's not generating income, that figure is on average £3,600 for that void period per property. But that can actually rise to 8.4k, so over double when the operations around that reletting process is slow, which I know is quite a broad term to say, a slow operation. It could mean many things. There could be many things to sort of consider there, but it does give quite an emphasis on why it's quite important to get people into homes quicker from a cost perspective, that is, anyway. And obviously there's lots of things to consider around that as well. But just some sort of stats to support that, I suppose. To build on that a little bit again with some Housemark data. So 3 years on now from the first lockdown, relet times don't appear to be reducing very quickly, which kind of goes into the other sort of part of the chart, which is 0.6% of properties vacant and available to let in April 23. Prior to 2020, that was around 0.5%. So at any given time, around 5,000 more social housing homes are empty now than in 2019. But yeah, again, going back to that point of, there's lots of things that go into this, isn't there? We're just talking about one specific aspect today in terms of the application onboarding process and how can we make that more efficient. But, you know, there's things that coming into play here around labour and materials, prices of inflation, certain standards, and obviously generally sort of allocation problems as a whole. So it's quite complex and lots to sort of consider. We're just looking at one particular facet today in terms of the application process, but it does give a little bit of insight into the drivers where this should be an area to look to improve upon, I suppose, as a whole. And some further things around this. Ultimately, the more efficient the application process is, the more accurate assessments can be done as well. So more time can be spent on the criteria checking, on background checks, ensuring the person who is applying is suited and has that specific need. The Guardian and Landlord today found that 98% increase in evictions across the past year due to arrears, due to things like property damage, antisocial behaviour, And I suppose related to that in some scenario is 70% of customer debt is caused by customers with poor credit history. So that could be an area which could be helped by optimizing that initial phases of applicant assessment and that initial stage of the journey. Ultimately people need homes, but for those people to begin tenancies and then go on to damaged properties or end up in arrears, which could have maybe been identified a little bit better as a risk earlier, those people can be supported in the right way and sort of guided to maybe avoid that knock-on effect a little bit later on. So again, another single aspect of a sort of a wider conversation, really, but I think one which is definitely still sort of important to consider anyway. So that's like a little bit of background, I suppose, in terms of framing today's topic. Some stats around the purpose of today, but also what we want to show is some examples as well. So as I say, it's something we've worked on in the past with numerous housing associations. And the first one was a few years ago for Orbit Group, an application we created called Orbit Move, which was an online application for applicants and like an attached iPad app for the housing officers to go out and use as well. And that was taken care of for a long period, 100% of their applications digitally, whether that be applicants by themselves or in support with the housing officer as well, using that app. Accent Group's another one, so we're going to show you a little bit more about Accent, and we've done a few others, one for Plymouth, which we'll come on to after. It's one of those where when we talk about digitising processes for housing associations, we do obviously a lot of websites for different purposes, property promotions, general needs, corporate websites and subsidiaries, do a lot of customer self-service portals, and lots of those things can be productized in a way which often the needs are fairly similar. What we found with the application processes is the process is quite specific to each organisation. Number one is obviously the route of applicants being direct versus CBL or local authority, or how that sort of looks and what those CBL providers, who they are and how that kind of works. The criteria obviously similar, but some nuances around it. So each and every time we've done this, it's been slightly different, but Accent's a great example. So we've been working with Accent now for actually 10 years next month on a variety of different projects, as I say, from websites, consultancy to plan for these applications, the customer portal, but also an application we created for them called that they've titled Let's Move. So that's the digital application side of things, which has both applicant and staff experience attached to it. Because these three pieces are tied together from website through to application and then subsequently tenancy management for successful applicants who become customers, we refer to that essentially as a digital ecosystem. It's all nicely tied into Accent's Active HMAS system to raise cases and to sort of manage that central source of truth for customer information. But yeah, I thought today we'd just talk you through a snippet of the sort of the user journey, if you like, from start to finish, and how that kind of works compared with that process that we talked through, which is quite typical in terms of being quite paper-based and quite high effort in terms of manual input. So as I say, it all starts with the Accent website in terms of the property search to look for available homes, including things or functions that you sort of expect around filtering certain things to narrow searches down by location, by type, and so on. Obviously, the other route into this for Accent and for many others is CBL, so which carries a slightly different starting point, I suppose, but follows the same process after that beginning aspect, which is the same for Plymouth, which I'll come into after. But yeah, navigate to Accent website, jump into find a home, looking for rentals available, filter them and sort of narrow down those results. Finding a home that I like the look of in the property search area, it's the right location, affordable price. I'll have a little look through the images and the video content and the key information attached to it, the right size for my family and it's affordable, etc. Rather than just sort of submitting an inquiry through, which lots of websites do. We've got the apply now button with Accent, so we can begin that sort of application journey and begin capturing that information for the prospective customer to see if they are in a position of suitability, affordability and need, and everything that sort of surrounds that as well. So at that stage, be invited to set up an account and begin filling in a multi-stage application form to give the information about me that Accent need to know. They need to assess my need, suitability and affordability, as I say. The user interface is really nice and easy to understand. I can see a progress bar across the top to indicate how much is left versus how much I've done, and maybe go away and sort of find the information that I need and save it and come back to it later on. So obviously there's going to be some personal information inputted into here, and then there's these sort of questions which Accent decided to put in here in collaboration with us to sort of describe life, home, and sort of working situation, I believe, to help sort of create those bandings of need, suitability, and affordability as well. And then, yeah, moving on from that stage is completing that sort of application form, which, as I say, is multi-staged. Get a nice little sort of summary of my application, the property, the information attached to it, the status attached to the specific progress of that particular application as well. Also the ability to withdraw it for whatever purpose I might need to. So from a customer point of view, we're almost there from an application perspective. Obviously, there's just a couple of screens associated here, but the form is a little bit longer. But then, yeah, my dashboard can let me see other applications I might have logged with Accent. I can check the status of those ones. I can also loop back into Find a Home as well to look for other potential properties, things like my profile to update information and sort of get in touch with Accent and what have you. And then there's also this my alert section as well. So I can import a criteria here to make sure that when Accent actually lists a property on the direct sort of application route, I can get notified with an email to let me know that there's an available property within the criteria I'm looking for, and jump back into an application, apply for that home as well nice and quickly to give me the best chance. But yeah, I suppose attached to this, as we said a little bit earlier, the applicant journey, providing that information and giving Accent the information they need to make the assessment. But there's also obviously crucially the staff experience as well. So it carries the same user interface, looks very, very similar, but the data presented and sort of actions within here are obviously different. So Accent staff and Accent teams can see shortlists by person, by property, a snapshot of those shortlists attached to it as well, and the ability to sort of view and click into those a little bit further, to do things around sort of reviewing the application specifically. You can see the system sort of banded, done like an initial assessment and banding based upon the logic we've built in to the back office to sort of grade that user around eligibility, affordability, sustainability, and general sort of need as well, to sort of grade that. So that gives me as an Accent sort of team member what I need to go and have an initial look, maybe investigate further with looking into the evidence provided, specifics around certain pieces of history, and also carry out tasks as well. So we can toggle here and sort of the process almost forks. So home visit required, we can sort of set that up. We can move into a property viewing phase, or if we've been through those steps already, we can sort of look at arranging the welcome meeting as well with the customer and pop the information through to them to sort of make that arrangement with Accent as well to have a look at the property. And then when we get to the welcome meeting, so if we imagine the journey is find a home, apply, assessment, and sort of acceptance, we move into that welcome meeting stage where we'll load this form back up, run through handover information with the new customer as well, so things like showing where the stop tap is, talking about utilities, discussing tenant responsibilities, and even a helpful video sort of to say that these are your responsibilities, these are ours. Let's sign it, both of us together, to say that we both watched this together and we're in agreement. That's sort of agreeable. The tenancy agreement happens slightly separate to this at the moment, but I can take first sort of payments as well, or even set up a direct debit. So in comparison to that journey we sort of discussed a little bit earlier around lots and lots of paper forms, some of our clients in the past, there's been a face-to-face meeting at an office for each and every applicant, regardless of stage, which obviously is very, very inefficient in itself. So in comparison to that, we've captured all the information digitally. It's nice and easy for the customer. And we're at the welcome stage now to sort of capture further information attached to that tenancy to onboard the new customer effectively as well. And going back to that point of sort of digital ecosystem and how the three sort of intertwine with each other. Website for the initial step, applications portal, let's move for the second stage, and then for successful applicants moving into customers, they're sort of seamlessly moved into the My Account portal, Accent call it, so they can look at their account balance, pay rent, they can book repairs and look at status of previous repairs maybe, look at notifications, look at documentation, these sorts of things. So it's that sort of journey, building that digital by default, we often use the term, don't we, around looking for a property, applying and becoming a customer and managing my tenancy digitally as well. So a really good example of what we're talking about today in terms of building that more efficient process and capturing things in more sort of digital manner, I suppose. But yeah, as I say, it's something we've done a few times before in the past, also for Plymouth Community Homes. Their source of applicants is solely CBL. So the first stage for us for this portal is porting that information through from that CBL provider into the application. And when someone's invited in there, essentially go through a checking process. So rather than having to import all the information, it's sort of put in there for them. They check it and update things where needs be, because that CBL application might have been done a while ago potentially. And then, yeah, obviously an attached staff journey for those guys as well. But things like staff members can put annotations on applicants. They can put comments back and forth to the applicants as well. Again, sort of reducing that need, hopefully, for things like phone calls where things can be answered a little bit more efficiently online, and only booking face-to-face sessions or viewings, welcome meetings where appropriate, essentially. Is one which we've actually done a Housing Hive on specifically in the past with John from Plymouth. I think it was about a year ago, actually, so it was July or so last year. So if you'd like to see a short demo in terms of John Yakes, who is a business analyst at PCH, feel free to pop over to that previous video, and we'll pop the link in the follow-up email as well for you to have a look at those, because there's a little bit of a demo from John to show how the process works from a portal point of view, and how that interacts with a certain internal system they have as well, which I believe is Northgate. But yeah, always get some nice quotes from John at PCH. So touching again on those purposes mentioned at the start around internal challenges, user experience, but also how that tool is potentially impacting channel shift generally as a whole for PCH. And sort of building that digital sort of relationship for certain customers at least. But yeah, I suppose to finish, before we ask if you've got any questions, it's those benefits really. And obviously I think they're quite clear based on what we talked about today when compared with that process we talked about at the beginning, but it does build that good first impression. So we do want to build a nice first impression with a potential customer. It's a journey in for them, which doesn't begin with quite a long-winded process or convoluted process with multiple pieces of paper being passed around and phone calls to sort of book appointments and viewings and things. It's a nice encouraging first impression, certainly for those people who are digital sort of natives and confident to do so. Obviously, that point we've made a couple of times around data security, digital data captured appropriately with the correct means of sort of time-bound storage attached. So only holding on for data where you actually need it as well, and sort of putting things in place to maybe purge that data if someone's almost got to the end but not become a customer. We don't actually need their data for a certain period. Yeah, building that digital by default relationship. So it starts off with a digital interactive sort of journey, if you like, and customers are therefore more likely to sort of engage digitally later on. And in turn, that's going to impact channel shift as a whole. So the more newly onboarded customers that move through this process and end up in some sort of self-service portal and sort of using that day to day, the smaller that pot of people who are willing, are able, and have the access to do so, but you just need to sort of convert them some way to digital users. That sort of pot of people becomes smaller over time, which therefore leaves the pot of people who can't engage digitally with more means of access and more availability to get in touch with you more manually and sort of offer that support closer and provide that empathy where needed, I suppose. But yeah, as I say, it's one of those which can be quite specific to each organization, depending upon how that initial process works, how the assessment needs to be carried out, and sort of how bookings and things are appointed later on. But yeah, if you'd like to explore with us how we might be able to help you with some consultations, or at least ask some initial questions to sort of help you identify where that need might be, or how that digital process could be implemented, just let us know. Happy to sort of jump on an initial call as well if you pop me a message on LinkedIn or email. But yeah, I suppose that sort of concludes the core content of today in terms of the background, some stats around why it's important, potential benefits, and also some real world case studies as well. So I wonder if there's any sort of questions at this part that me or Liv can look to answer, or at least try and find someone who can. Anything come through, Liv?
Yeah, we've got some in the chat. So the first one is from Clive, and he said, how does it integrate with housing association systems?
Good question. So essentially the piece of software we specialize in, Clive, is called Umbraco. It's an open source content management system. We've used that for all of the websites we deliver, but also all of the sort of integrated customer portals and applications portals as well. So what that lets us do is create the front end that we need to, the user interface to show the content and the sort of the journey we need to create, and sort of move people through that process. But also lets us integrate with APIs as well. So for the likes of Plymouth, for the likes of Accent and some others, we've created that integration with an API to ensure that the data source is the housing association system. We surface that where needed, and we only post information back into that system where appropriate and where required, nice and securely as well. So it's essentially a nicely designed front end of that system for customers or applicants to interact with, and then that data is sort of ported through the API integration to make sure it's held on the housing association side. Hopefully that helps, answers your question.
The next one, also from Clive, what is the cost model, transaction, users, etc.?
For a portal such as this, we tend to work off, rather than sort of cost per transactions, it tends to be a more typical sort of software arrangement. So we have a number of digital products, this portal being one of them. So we'll essentially assess the effort we need to create it and build those integrations to begin with. And that becomes like a project investment, if you like, and then we'll host it, maintain it, and sort of improve it moving forwards as well. So there's no necessary fees attached to number of applications or number of users in there. That's kind of unlimited, if you like, really. It's more the creation and launch of the software and then hosting it so it's available and maintaining it moving forwards as well. That's sort of where the subscription comes in.
Thank you. Next question from Amanda. Do you have any stats on reduction of resource costs, etc.?
That's a really good question. None to hand off the top of my head, but I can certainly get in touch with some of our clients who have done this with, and yeah, we can pop that in the follow-up email as soon as we can. Yeah, I can see where that would be very, very useful to know in terms of how many people use these things and therefore what impact that's had from a resourcing point of view. Also customer experience and feedback. Hopefully we'll try and get hold of some of that as well for you too.
Perfect, thank you. Next one, is this all GDPR compliant?
It will be, yeah. So that's a key consideration around certainly applications which carry personal information. So it's going to be a case of only capturing the information required for the housing association or authority to make the assessment. The information is never held on our side. It's always held with the housing association. There's like going back to that point earlier around data storage, only holding on to that information where needed and making sure people are consenting to making use of that information for other purposes, if it's used for other purposes. If not, then it won't be. But yeah, that'll be a key sort of consultation part at the beginning to make sure that GDPR consideration is taken care of for sure. Yeah, good question.
Can an applicant view a property online?
Yeah, definitely. That will go into the question of, I suppose, how the route of applicants come through. So if there's a case where you do have direct applicants and therefore you list properties and take inquiries on those properties manually at the moment, then yeah, there's no reason why people can't sort of view those properties online, have a look around. Obviously, the housing association themselves would be sort of looking after and managing that content, listing the properties when they become available, etc., and sort of capturing the inquiry. But yeah, absolutely. We can facilitate the promotion of properties and sort of the online presence of available properties, I should say, I suppose, with the likes of a website or some sort of microsite to sort of build that initial step. Definitely, yeah.
Thank you. One from Kevin Turner. We are a specialist supported provider housing people with learning disabilities and or autism. Can the system be adapted so the customer facing information can be easily understood, for example, via easy read? Yeah,
for sure. To be honest, it's something which we have to consider quite a lot with the space that we work in. Certainly for public sector generally, but for organisations such as yourselves supporting those types of customers. So everything we design and build is accessibility compliant, and we look to use accessibility assistive technology to sort of help support that as well, with things like lots of our clients ask us to plug in things like Recite Me or Reach Deck, which is text to audio. But yeah, the design of the application itself will meet the required accessibility standards. And then there's a few other things we can do around that to make sure we enhance that, even if it's a case of moving through the application with a supporting party or someone supporting them, either at the association or some sort of carer, whatever that might look like. That's potentially possible as well. But yeah, accessibility is a key sort of focus for us from a design point of view, and then we look to see what technologies we can use to help leverage that further, I suppose, to help with screen reading software and easy to read things, so we can remove the imagery and just focus on text, for instance. Make sure the color contrasts are very high, so it's easy to read versus text or images versus the background as well.
Thank you. One from Andrew. He has said, what's the best hardware for this style of app to be used on, please? For example, tablet, phone, laptop.
That's a good question as well. So everything we create is fully responsive, so it can be used on desktop, tablet, or mobile. What we typically do with that is we look into our clients' analytics data to have a little bit of a workout in terms of what percentages of customers or users generally tend to view information on mobile versus tablet and desktop, and then we'll sort of prioritize that type of device first. But yeah, each of the applications we deliver will be workable and usable, optimized for each device type. So whichever sort of works best, essentially. But I would have thought with an application such as applying for a home and we need to go away and find information and maybe come back and put that back in, typically people are probably going to use desktops more so for that rather than just browsing online as they would usually on mobile. But yeah, it's definitely not a hard and fast rule. Maybe we could follow up with that in the follow-up email as well when we come back on the statistics in terms of asking Accent and some of the guys in terms of the GA data around that as well. But yeah, usable on all device types.
Thank you. Final question for now. Steph said, does the tenant have to do one application per property bid, or can they use an existing application to bid for another property?
That's a good question. Yeah, so on the Accent example, once they've been through that initial phase of data capture and providing the evidence, etc., and applied for an initial home, you can then reuse that information for other available properties with Accent, for example. So yeah, it'd just be a case of making sure we can facilitate that with how the data is held on your side, and make sure that, I suppose, there's some sort of means of updating it over a certain period. But yeah, that can absolutely be achieved in terms of reusing applicant data from previous applications for another property, for sure. Definitely possible, yeah.
And we probably have time for this one final one. Do you have any products or services that can bolt on to this? Also, is it cloud hosted, and is it via you or via the housing association's hosting arrangements?
So yes to cloud hosting question. We host all of our applications on Azure, which is quite a scalable cloud-based infrastructure, and there's various sort of different packages we can offer there as well, whether it be shared, dedicated, or even dual servers as well. Yeah, we tend to host all of the solutions that we design and build, so we have direct access to make amendments, tweaks, or even issue resolution where required. So for the most part, we host all of the solutions ourselves as well. But yeah, bolt-ons to this are things such as, Accent's a good example of three things being bolted together essentially. Publicly accessible website, applications portal, and then tenancy management portal are all three separate platforms essentially, but also sort of all bolted together. Other things to consider around that would be things like implementing a live chat function or a chat bot. We also have things like tenancy management self-service apps as well, which is just for customers rather than applications, but that could be essentially bolted in as well. So if someone's moved through a application journey and is successful, let's pop them into the self-service app to manage their tenancy that way. So yeah, there's all sorts of things we could bolt into it essentially. But with it being open source, the possibilities are quite broad there. But there's definitely other things we could offer to sort of help improve the end-to-end experience for customers and for colleagues as well.
I think that's it for questions.
Okay, great stuff. Hopefully we answered your questions okay there, guys. Anything from you, Liv, on this at all?
I think just on that last question about bolt-on products and services, I think for lots of our clients, it makes a lot of sense to have everything sat together, and the systems are more easily able to talk to each other, and the connections and API connections are pre-established as well. So I think there's definite benefit. I think overall, what we were saying about having a digital first interaction is really, really important, because it's then kind of setting the standard going forward in terms of, if you are able to do that, it saves time for people who are unable to work on digital platforms, and allows for your teams to support them more effectively. So that kind of, sometimes we're early on in our digital journey, but I think once we get kind of more established from a journey end to end is when you see kind of major efficiencies as well. I think that's it from me.
Great stuff. Okay, thanks for that, Liv. I suppose just to finish then, we as I say, 3 left for the year now, which is bizarre, but the next one is end of September, so last Thursday of each month we try and do, hence why I'm not doing one in December. 20th of September, The next one is going to be sort of taking a step back from this essentially and talking about digital transformation as a whole, navigating challenges, realizing the benefits, essentially how to get from the end goal that we talk quite often about from a housing point of view with these types of digital solutions, but how we get from A to B, and often it's a case of not being necessarily ready just to bolt something like this in. So how do we move through a digital capabilities assessment to begin with? How do we plan the roadmap of developments moving forwards to make sure that not only stakeholders are on board throughout, to make sure that buy-in is across the board, but also customers involved throughout end to end as well, to make sure the end outcome is designed around them and customer centric. So that will be the next session, end of September. So hopefully we will see you there. Feel free to pop over to the sign up page and register for that one. But yeah, we'll get this edited and posted tomorrow and add those pieces of information to the follow-up email where we can. But yeah, I want to thank you all again for your time. Thank you, Liv, for helping for sort today and fielding those questions. Thanks very much, guys, and have a good rest of your day and the weekend when it comes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Take care.